Hello students and welcome to this video on joint and byproduct costing. So this is a question that I want us to look at with regards to joint and byproduct costing and doing the applicable calculations with regard to it. So in joint and byproduct costing, it basically means that we have a number of products that we manufacture within the same process. So there is this point where we call the split off point, and after the split off point, the different joint products can further be processed into different products. Then we also have this concept of a byproduct. And a byproduct is basically a product that is produced spontaneously during the production of joint products. So it is not necessarily our intent to make this byproduct, but it comes about in producing the joint products. So a good example of this would be, for example, in the production of petrol, a byproduct is a product such as plastic. So it's not intended for plastic to be produced. However, it is a byproduct, a spontaneous byproduct of the original production process. So I want us to look at this question. It's called Free2BU, and it says that Free2BU manufactures two different joint products, Too Cool and At Free, and they incur joint cost of 200,000 Rand for direct materials and 300,000 Rand for labor. Then a byproduct called For You is produced simultaneously and can be sold for 30,000 Rand. The cost incurred with regard to this byproduct is 4,000 Rand. Then they've given you in a block below, they've given you a summary and they say of your joint costs for the joint products, and you will see that there's a selling price per unit at split off, and then there's a selling price after further processing. Then there's a further processing cost. Of course, if you take the decision to further process a product, you're going to incur an additional cost to get it into a different form. And then there's total production in units. If we look at the first required part asks, should the joint products be processed further? So as I've stated previously, we basically have two options. We can just sell the product at the split-off point, or we can opt to process the product further. So there's a calculation that you can do to determine whether you should process further or whether you should rather just sell the product at split-off point. Then 2.2 says allocate the joint cost to the products by applying the physical output method. Assume that the products are sold at split off. So this is quite important. The products are sold at split off. That means that we should use the selling price at split off. So if the product is sold at split off, we have taken the decision not to process it further, and therefore the selling price of 100 Rand and 100 Rand will apply. Then in 2.3, it says allocate the joint cost to the product by applying the net realizable value. Assume that the products are further processed. So to apply this method called net realizable value, you must opt to further process the product. Otherwise, this method cannot be applied. And then in 2.4, allocate the joint cost to the product by using the cost constant gross profit markup method. So there's basically three methods that are important: the physical output method, the net realizable method, and then the gross profit markup method. So that's the three types of calculations you need to be able to do above and beyond knowing whether products should be further processed or not. All right, so let's start with 2.1. Should the products be further processed? So what we need to do is go and determine, but what is the difference in the selling price versus what is the further processing cost? So for 2.1, I'm going to say, right, so the question is, should we process further? And in order to do this, we need to compare two things: the change in selling price versus the cost to process further. So here we can do the calculation now for the two products. So the first product was called Too Cool and then at free. So there's Too Cool, there's at free. Right, so let me just explain to Excel what's going on. Okay, so we have two products. So the first thing that we want to calculate is then the change. What is the change in sales? Right, so the change in sales, let's start with Too Cool. If I sell the price, I'm going to call it SP, the selling price at your split off was, if we look at the information for Too Cool, it was 100 Rand. Then, if we further process, the selling price after process was 250. So that is a change of 150 Rand. So I'm going to say it's 250 minus 100, which gives me an increase in the sales of 150 Rand per unit. Then I need to go and see, but how many units do we have? And the production was 100,000. So there, I'm going to say times 100,000. And then our increase or our change in sales is then the 150 Rand change in the selling price times a production of 100,000 units. Therefore, there's 1.5 million Rand that we will have in, is it 1.5 million? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, is it 15 million, I'm guessing? Yes, it's 15 million. We just count the zeros. So it's an additional 15 million that we will score from having this increase in selling price. So then we must also look at what is the process cost. So if I look at the process cost, they tell me in the question that it is 60 Rand. So the process cost is 60 Rand. And the production of this product is still 100,000 units. So if I look at my change in cost, I get to a total of 6 million Rand. So my sales will increase by 15 million and my costs will increase by 6 million. So I will make a net profit then of the 15 million minus the 6 million of 9 million Rand. So this is a good thing. And I'm going to say yes. I'm going to process this product of Too Cool further for the reason that I'm making a profit. My sales increase by far more than the change in the process cost. Therefore, I want to further process this product. Then we have at free. What's going on with at free? With at free, we have a change as well. So at split off, it's 100 Rand. If we process further, we can sell it for 300 Rand. So per unit, the selling price increases by 200 Rand. If I look at my production, it's 120,000 units. So now I can calculate my sales, change in sales, and the change in sales is 24 million. My further processing cost, if I look at it, it's 75 Rand. And I still have a production of 120,000 units. Therefore, it's going to be 75 times the 120, and that gives me 9 million. So I'm also here making a net profit and not a net loss, because I have 24 million that I will gain from sales, and then I will give up 9 million for further processing. So obviously I'm making a profit, and the total profit there is 15 million. So therefore, I will want to further process because I am making a profit. Should the calculation leave you in a situation where the change in sales is actually lesser than the change in the cost, then obviously that is a net loss. And you want to then avoid further processing that product because there's no use in running a business and you sit with a situation where you are running at a loss. So it's very important that the change in sales should exceed the change in the processing costs. Right, so that was 2.1. In 2.2, they say allocate the joint cost to the products by applying the physical output method. So the physical output method refers to the units. So if we use physical output, we are going to use the 100,000 and the 120,000 as a weighing method to allocate the joint cost. So into point 2, the first thing we need to do is we need to calculate the joint cost. So this is a support calc in order to be able to answer the question. So if I look at the joint cost, I see that there is some material and there's also some joint cost in terms of labor. Right, so it is 200,000 and 300,000 is given. But then you need to pay attention to the fact that there's a byproduct. So if a question does not contain a byproduct, you will simply add up these two joint costs and get to a total joint cost. But if the question contains a byproduct, it is important to remember that you need to go and minus profit on the byproduct. Byproduct. All right, so let's look at the byproduct. For the byproduct, we have a 30,000 Rand in sales and we have a cost of 4,000. So if I do that calculation, which is 30,000 minus 4,000, you will find that there's a profit of 26,000 and we minus the 26,000. So you either only have joint cost and you add up these two, or you have joint products and byproducts, and in the instance of having a byproduct, you will minus the profit from the cost because you've made a profit from selling the byproduct, it will lessen the costs that you incur in this production process. So I'm going to get the sum of everything, and the joint cost is then 474,000. So I'm just going to put it in bold. Now I can continue to go and calculate then the joint cost allocation. So they ask me to allocate the joint costs to the product, right? So if I look at the joint cost calculation based on units, I'm going to say the following. So there is this product, it's called Too Cool. The other one is called At Free. So I'm going to look at, once again, let me just explain to Excel, this is not a calculation. There we go. Right, so the units, 100,000, 120,000. Total units, 220,000. So if I look at the joint cost, I've just calculated my joint cost, and the total joint cost is the 474,000. Then I now need to go and split this between my two products. So how we go about it is to say you take the total Rand value, the 474,000, you divide it by 220 which is the total units, and you times it by the units that are applicable to the product that you are calculating. So in this instance, it will be 100,000 for the 2 cool. Then I'm just going to round. The instruction is to round to 2 decimals. Right. Then if we look at the @free, we're going to say it's again the 474,000 divided by the total units, 220, and we're going to times it by the units that are applicable to @free, which is 120,000. Again, I am just rounding to 2 decimals. There we go. So that's your joint cost. The question, it did not ask it in that manner, but the question can ask you to calculate the profit as well. So here they just said, allocate the joint cost to the byproduct, which is then what we just did. We calculated the joint cost for each product. Should they ask you for the profit, in applying the physical output, you will simply also need to calculate the sales. So now you will have sales minus joint cost. Please note how we will not have further processing cost, because the instruction is assume that the products are sold at split off. So if products are already sold at split off, that means that we do not process them any further. Right, so for the sales, we need to go and do a calculation, and we need to find then the sales price at split off, which is 100 Rand and 100 Rand. So I'm going to say it is 100 Rand times the number of units, which is 100,000. Then I'm going to say for @free, it is also 100 Rand times the units of 120,000. Then the joint costs, we have already calculated. So there I will now just calculate my profit, and the profit will simply be my sales minus the joint cost. My sales minus the joint cost. Right. So if they were to ask you to calculate the profit, you would do it in this manner. So in calculating the sales, please just mind the instruction as to whether the products are further processed or not. All right, we are on 2.3. In 2.3, they ask you to use the net realizable value method. All right, and in the net realizable value method, we need to always further process the products. Right, so the net realizable method actually uses a subtotal to allocate the joint cost to the product. So let's start with 2.3. So again, we will have 2 cool, we will have @free. Right. So now we're going to have to calculate sales, but please note how we now have to use the selling price after further processing, and the instruction clearly says assume that products are further processed. So we need to use that selling price, and that was 250 and 300 Rand. So for 2 cool, I'm going to say 250 times the 100,000 units for my total sales. For free, I'm going to say it's 300 Rand, I'm guessing, at 120,000 units. Just want to check. Yes, 250 and 300. So they are my sales. Then I'm going to minus from that my cost to process. And in the cost to process, you will simply use the value for further processing. So it was 60 Rand per unit and 75 Rand per unit. So here I'm going to say it is 60 Rand per unit times our 100,000 units. And here I'm going to say it is 75 Rand times the 120,000 units. Now I'm going to get to my net realizable value, which is your sales minus the cost of further processing. And I need to get to the total because now this will be my weighing. So with the physical output, when I did my calculations for joint cost, the weighing, the division, and the multiplication was done in terms of the number of units. So now the weighing is done in terms of the net realizable value. So here I need a total of the two. And that gives you 46 million. So now I can go and allocate my joint cost. So the joint cost will still be the same. I will always calculate joint cost in the same way. It is the different joint costs added together and minus the profit of a byproduct if a byproduct is included in the question. So that will still remain to be 474,000. Right, so my total, I'm just going to put in the total there, is for the joint cost remains 474,000. So now to allocate the joint cost, I'm going to say 474,000 divided by the 46 million total times the net realizable value that applies to the product that I'm calculating. Again, I am just rounding to 2 decimals as per instruction. Then for my at3, it's going to be the 474,000 divided by the total net realizable value times by the net realizable value for the product calculated. And I again just round to 2 decimals. Then they can ask you for the profit. In this question, they did not, but I am just going to calculate it for in the instance if it should be asked. So you will simply say for the profit, it's the net realizable value minus the joint cost. The net realizable value minus the joint cost. Right, so there is the application of your net realizable value method. I think it is pretty straightforward. Then in 2.4, I think this is I want to say the most tricky one. And this is the calculation for the gross profit markup method. So if they ask the markup method, there's a certain process that needs to be followed. Please note that they again say in 2.4 that assume that products are further processed. That is very, very important information to look at because it will affect the sales price that we use. So they say here the gross profit markup method should be used. Right, so how do we do that? So we actually do this in 2 steps. So step 1 is to find the overall gross profit markup. And this is done as follows. So in this step 1, we simply ignore the fact that there are 2 products and we do a calculation for this company as a whole. So we only start with the following and we say it is sales minus your further processing minus your joint cost. Right, so here we're going to have to do a calculation. So for the sales, we will have 2 different types of sales. And we will have for product to cool, for product at free, and they say it's further processed. So it will be 250 and 300 Rand. So we're going to say it's 250 times 100,000 plus 300 times 120,000. So that gives us total sales of, we have calculated this somewhere else over there. So I'm just going to say this plus that. It should give you the same answer as those 2 added together. Then the further processing cost, I think it was 60 Rand for the 100,000 units plus 75 Rand for the 120,000 units. And again, we have calculated it somewhere. The sum of that for the processing cost was then those two. And then we have the joint cost, and the joint cost was 474,000. And now we're going to get to a profit. So the profit of the overall business is then the sales minus the two types of costs. And now we can calculate our markup. So the markup is then based on sales. So it's going to be the 455,260,000 divided by the sales of 61,000,000. And if we do that calculation, please remember also just to times by 100 in order to get to a percentage. So it's going to be this profit that we've calculated divided by the sales times 100 to get a percentage. And the percentage rounded to 2 decimals is then 74.63%. Now we've completed step 1, so we will go to step 2. So for step 2, we do separate calculations based on the markup in step 1. Right, so we're going to start again with the sales. We have 2 products, 2 cool and at-free. Oh, come on, there we go. And then the sales will again be the 250 Rand times 100,000 units. And it will be 300 Rand times 120,000 units. Then we're going to calculate our processing cost. For the processing cost, we are going to say it is again 60 Rand times 100,000 units. And it is the 75 Rand times 120,000 units. Then we're going to calculate the profit for the product, and that will be based on sales. So the profit is then sales times markup. Right. We will then say it is the sales times the percentage we calculated, which was the 74.36. Also the sales times the percentage we calculated, 74.63, I beg your pardon, not 36. And let me just put in my zeros properly. 47. There we go. And there is the profit. So now we can calculate the joint cost. And the joint cost is simply then the sales minus the processing cost minus the profit. So I'm going to say it is this sales minus the processing cost. Please note how I minus the profit. Sometimes students have, in some instances, added the profit. Please don't. And then we're going to again repeat that calculation for the at-free product as well. And there we go. If you add these two up, just please note, they slightly differ. I have had questions about this. If you are in a situation where the markup is rounded, then the joint cost will add up to a total that is slightly over your joint cost, but it is marked as such, of course, because the instruction is to round to 2 decimals. Right, so there's your joint cost calculation then. I think of all, the calculation for the gross profit markup is the most difficult. Just split it into the 2 steps. First, get to the profit and the markup, and then in step 2, sales minus processing cost minus profit will give you your joint cost per product. Right, so this was the explanation on a joint and byproduct costing. I hope that this video has helped you a little bit. Also, be sure to go through the chapter in your textbook. Make sure that you read through that, you understand the definitions and the differences between joint products and byproducts. Very, very important, because one should not attempt to do calculations if you do not understand the theory behind it. So I will see you in class, and please stop by my office if you should have any other questions around this topic. Until then, have a great day.